Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Building Scalable Integrations in Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain with AMCS. My name is Colin Schofield, and I'm a Finance Acceleration Associate here at Avantiico. We're excited to have you with us today and appreciate you taking the time to join. Joining us today are two of our experts in this space, Michael Oakes, Senior Technical Solution Architect, and Dan McAllister, Senior Finance Consultant and Solution Architect here at Avantiico. Michael and Dan work closely with organizations designing and implementing integration frameworks across D365, and they bring deep experience helping companies move away from fragmented, manual, and overly customized integrations towards more scalable, structured approaches. Today's session is focused on one of the most common and often underestimated challenges in D365 integrations, or in Dynamics 365 integrations. In many cases, the biggest issues organizations face isn't with the platform itself, but how the systems are connected. Systems connected the wrong way, migrations handled in isolation, and frameworks built to solve today's problems without accounting for tomorrow's complexity often lead to manual workarounds, inconsistent data, and integrations that need to be rebuilt every time the business changes. This session is about getting ahead of that. We'll start by walking through your integration options within Dynamics 365, including API-based, file-based, and embedded approaches, and how to think about when to use each. From there, we'll explore how to design a scalable integration framework that connects systems, entities, and data flows across your environment without creating long-term technical debt. You'll also see how AMCS helps standardize and streamline integrations, especially in multi-entity environments where complexity tends to grow quickly. We'll bring this to life with real-world examples, including integrations with CRM, procurement platforms, banking systems, and eCommerce, along with practical guidance on structuring integrations to support future growth. Whether you're already live on Dynamics 365 and dealing with fragmented integrations, or planning a migration and looking to avoid inheriting integration challenges, this session will give you a more structured, repeatable approach to building integrations that actually hold up over time. We'll wrap up with key takeaways and leave some time at the end for a Q&A. But before we dive in, I want to quickly highlight an upcoming event that we think will be especially valuable. Join us on May 19th from 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific Time for this webinar, Dynamics 365 FNSCM Licensing and Security Enforcement, featuring our D365 licensing expert, Morten Lugstrup. In this session, we'll break down Microsoft's new rolling compliance enforcement and what it means for your organization. We'll cover key timelines and show how to use Azure telemetry insights to better understand user activity and right-size license assignments. We'll also walk through updates to security and governance in D365, how to audit your current licensing setup ahead of renewal windows, and share real-world examples of how organizations have avoided unexpected licensing costs. If you're involved in licensing compliance or cost optimization, this is definitely one you don't want to miss. And lastly, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout the session. We'll make sure to address them throughout the session and in a Q&A afterwards, as well as following up via email. And with no further ado, I will hand it over to Michael and Dan.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, I'm Dan McAllister. Thanks, Colin, for that intro. The primary presenter today will be Michael Oakes. Michael's a technical architect with over 20 years of experience in D365 and AX, delivering advanced X++ development, integrations, data migration, environment strategy, and much, much more. So I'll give a quick intro to what we're covering today in a little bit more detail, and then I'll hand it over to Michael for a live demo. So starting with Avantiico, who is Avantiico? We're a system integrator based out of the US. We also run a managed services group and are a cloud service provider also in the US. In addition to that, we supply IP ISV solutions for D365 finance and supply chain globally. And the three solutions that fall under our automation IP on the right are our third-party logistics automation cloud with freight invoice reconciliation automation included, our advanced multi-company solution, AMCS, and our data migration accelerator. Our key emphasis as a partner, as a system integrator over the past several years is, how can we help our customers get the most value out of their existing platform, the existing technology that they already own. You own so much capability within the solution that Microsoft is continually investing in. How can we add to that, when you're already live in D365? And so, one is ISV solutions. The second is, all the latest and greatest in AI and Microsoft Fabric. And then third is leveraging the modules and so on that are already within D365 and improving automation and integrations into those systems. To that end, our learning about integration over the years is that there's three primary integration pathways. So the first is file-based integrations. This would be where you have some sort of monthly, weekly, or even daily process where a file gets dropped somewhere for you to get picked up and processed. This could be like a payroll feed or an expense management feed. But you need a way to easily go and pick up that file or receive a file and process it into D365. Historically, that's been done through custom processes. With our AMCS solution, we can do that with configuration. A second option would be integrations via API. So Microsoft provides the OData framework for this. We also have an API-based framework with our multi-company automation solution. That will be the focus of today's webinar, though the things that we talk about will be broadly applicable regardless of your approach to that integration. But we'll make an argument of where OData makes sense and where maybe it doesn't make sense. And then the third integration pathway would be an orchestrated integration. And so this would be a scenario where it's important that multiple APIs are hit in a sequence and that there are dependencies built into that sequence. So an example could be if you're receiving sales orders, invoices on those sales orders, and then payments on those invoices. If you try to process the invoice before the order, then your integration will be in error. If you try to process the payment before the invoice, your integration will be in error. So it's very important that those types of multi-step integrations are orchestrated carefully to ensure that dependencies are respected. And then, final comment, a rising topic in the space is an iPaaS or an integration platform as a solution. So you can read the AI blurb here about what is an iPaaS solution, but ultimately this is the glue that brings systems together so that they can talk to each other in a single platform through a single pathway that is easy to manage. If you end up with integrations pointing in different directions across different systems, it can get very chaotic. And so it's ideal in complex integration scenarios that you have an integration platform as a service solution that acts as a central point for that data flow. And if D365 Finance and Supply Chain is your core solution, then AMCS is an iPaaS solution that could work for you. That contains all this data that can bring in and send out data through the D365 platform, and at a significantly less expensive cost than some of the other iPaaS solutions that are out there that are more generic. Okay. So with that, we're talking today about API-based integrations into D365 Finance. The specific scenario you'll see today is where we are integrating customer data from a CRM called HubSpot. HubSpot has the ability to send data via API, has internal triggers when certain actions happen. And so the requirements that we're working from today that Michael will demo is that we need to be able to receive data from HubSpot to update data in D365, customers in this case. We need to send information back to HubSpot so that HubSpot knows the status of the integration. We need to allow for both synchronous and asynchronous integration, which is a really important point from a performance standpoint. If you have any sort of volume in your integrations, then you probably do not want to force everything to be synchronous because that could cause timeout issues and bottlenecks. And then finally, we wanted to optimize on security. And so with that, Michael, I'll hand it over to you to take over the screen share and to talk about integrations into D365 through APIs.
All right. Yeah. Let me just share my screen. See if I can do it. Can anybody hear me okay? Can anybody see my screen?
Yep, to both.
Is the resolution okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to jump between a few screens. So I got a request from Dan, which is he wanted me to build an integration, like it's just said, between HubSpot and D365. And I'm going to give you a live demo of this now, and then I'm going to go into lift the HUD up and just show you how we built this and the design considerations that we made. So the request was there's a company in HubSpot. Any adjustments or changes to that, we wanted to synchronize to F&O to either create or update a customer. That customer either has to have a manual number sequence or manually created, or support customers with a number sequence. So HubSpot doesn't know what the customer account in F&O is. It's got to be able to create that customer and to be able to support updates to that customer. Once that customer account is updated, we need a notification back to HubSpot. So I'm going to just show you, here's HubSpot here, and here's a sample customer here. We've already actually created this customer account here, Avantiico in, and you'll notice it's got a number sequence. That number sequence is not known to HubSpot yet. We need the ability to create and update information. So what I'm going to do is just give you a live demo now. I'm going to change some information. Let's see what happens. So I'm just going to go away and change this information. So what needs to happen now is HubSpot is actually going to communicate to F&O. It's going to find that customer account, even though that customer account has a number sequence. It's going to come into here, into the customer account, and if I refresh the screen, if you pay attention to the address, hopefully when that comes up, the address has now been changed to Palm Springs. So changing that address is communicated, so we can do that synchronously near real time, or we can push that through to a batch job. Once that's actually done now, what's going to happen now is F&O is going to send a business event and communicate back to HubSpot, and we'll see a little notification that's just appeared here on HubSpot telling me that F&O has successfully received that request from HubSpot. It's updated the customer account, and it's sent that back to HubSpot, and it's communicating back to that. So we've actually built this using AMCS. So I'm going to go through and just explain exactly how we built this and the design considerations. So we need HubSpot to communicate to F&O, right? And we can expose that directly. But F&O as an ERP system is a very secure and private ERP system. In this demo, we don't want to expose F&O credentials, URLs, client IDs, app registrations, passwords. We don't want to expose that to external systems, external people. So we want to put a bridge in the middle, and that bridge is Power Automate. So what's actually happening here is HubSpot is actually calling Power Automate. And it's Power Automate that internally handles all of the credentials, all of the URL. It has error handling. It supports throttling and retrying. There are dashboards, there are reports, there are alerts. We can track performance, and we can see here HubSpot is actually called Power Automate. And Power Automate has built-in connectors, including connectors that can call with F&O. So internally, what's happening is HubSpot is calling the Power Automate flow, and it's the Power Automate flow that is actually calling F&O. And there are built-in connectors, and the connectors handle the app registration, the tenant ID, the client ID, the secrets. So if you ever dealt with any integration, it can handle that. So the question is, how have we designed the Power Automate flow here to call to F&O? And like Dan said, there's different approaches. We could do OData. You could do a web service. We could place this information in a file and have F&O pick it up, and we could put it into an SFTP side or a blob storage, whatever. In this case here, we've actually created a web service, and HubSpot is sending that information to the web service. So why are we using a custom web service, and why not OData? Well, if we use OData, we actually need to make several calls. We need to make a call to see if that customer exists. If it doesn't exist, if it does exist, we find it, and if it does, then we will call the OData entity to update or create that customer. The problem with that is that's real time. I can't offload that for high volume. So one of the requests is we need to be able to support both synchronous requests and asynchronous requests. So for high volume, I want to take this information and put it into a queue. as quickly and as cheaply and as efficiently as I can. I want to be able to then either process that queue immediately, which is synchronous, or let a background batch job in F&O pick that up every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. And then we can use, different bundling, top picking, and threading technology to pick those queues up for performance reasons. So what's actually here is HubSpot is actually just calling this, and this is actually calling a web service. And we're actually tracking information about where this information came from. So again, if you use OData and you send something back, you can't, it's difficult to then offload that to a background process asynchronously. But then how would you notify the external system? Hey, I've created the customer. I've not created the customer. There's been an error. Everything's okay. In that case, we're using a business event. So as AMCS has we support different business events as data's coming through the system from an external system. It could be SFTP, it could be blob storage, it could be a web service. We actually expose different business events. So what's actually here is when the customer was actually updated, F&O sent a business event. Again, where does it send that business event to? We could send it directly to HubSpot, but again, I don't want the two systems talking to each other directly. The F&O, is private. I don't want HubSpot to know exactly where that information is going, which ERP system. So what's happening is we've created a business event and we're actually sending that back to Power Automate, and that's part of standard F&O. And here is the business event response back. So in this case here, when we receive that information, we can actually track from that original request, even though it could be real time, synchronous, this could be on a batch job running at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. We know where that request came from. We're actually tracking that in a separate queuing system. So basically, we can actually say that came from HubSpot. If that once I receive that business event, whenever that's fired, we can actually then send that business event back, and we can actually send information back from the customer account to the business event and send that back. So the core of this is we've actually exposed web services as part of AMCS, and there's about, I think, 150 of them. Customers, vendors, sales orders, purchase orders. We've got GL journals, trade agreement journals, vendor payment, customer payment journals. We've got a whole bunch of different web services that we can actually expose. And that's part of the challenge, is if you're an integrator, if you're a developer or a technical person, Microsoft don't supply any technical information about these web services. They don't publish, here are the web services out of the box, here's how you call them. Not only that, but every implementation is different. Your customer account may be 20 characters. I could do a customization in my environment, and my customer account is now 25 characters. So if I want to create a customer, what fields are mandatory, what fields are optional, how do I call these web services or OData, what are the limitations? If I want to pass an enum, what is the list of values I can pass in that enum? So as part of this is AMCS, we actually maintain all of the different imports that we support. And if you install AMCS on your system, what you can actually do is you can actually download a Postman collection. And I don't know if anybody's ever worked with Postman, but it's a testing and integration tool. So whenever we're doing any integration with any external system, one of the things we always ask is, hey, do they have a Postman collection that we can have? And that provides all the samples, how to call the APIs, what's optional, what's mandatory, what are the limitations, what are the warnings, what do I need to consider? And so you can actually download this Postman collection, and this is kind of self-aware. Because you're installing it, it's actually scraping information from your system. So if your customer account is 20 characters, it's going to tell you the customer account is 20 characters. If you've added a custom field, it's going to present that information. If that custom field is mandatory, it's going to tell you. So you can actually download this Postman collection here. I've already downloaded one. It's going to give you this information here. It's going to give you a list. It's going to give you some information, some instructions, and it's got a list of how to authenticate. It's pre-populated some information, the URL. You would have to put in some information, the client ID and the secret. But we've got all of the information that we need to now. So if I look into here, if I look in the customer account, it's actually going to give me all of the information that I need to fill in. It's going to give me all of the information. It's the customer account 20, it's 20. If you've customized yours to be 30, that will say 30. It's going to give you the help text. It's going to help you with enums, and that can be something that can really help you out if you've got a choice and you're not quite certain what to do. It's going to tell you. You can put in federal or non-federal or that, and you can put in the label, or you can put in the name, and we can actually support both of those. So we're actually exposing this information here, and you've got the dynamic information. And again, if you've added a custom field, that custom field will then show on here, and actually be able to see that information here. So we actually use this Postman collection to actually build this information. So I was able to go into here, and actually see what we've got information. So I was able to see what the mandatory fields are, what the optional fields are, and this explains exactly how we're going to do this one on here. So we've got this information here, and this just explains it. And one of the things that we can do is we can actually do a synchronous request or asynchronous. So what's actually happening in here is we need to get that request from HubSpot into F&O as quickly as possible. We may want to process it real time, but we may not. So what's actually happening is the web service is just placing that information into a queue here. It's a very, very simple request. It's just going to create a record, assign that record to GUID, and place the message in a JSON format here. It doesn't need to do a lookup if I'm updating a customer. It doesn't need to say, well, does that customer exist? Does it exist in this legal entity? Does it not? It's just going to place that. So we can get extremely high volume into these queuing mechanisms. There's no real overhead, right? It's just creating a record with a JSON payload. That's all that is. If I then mark that as a synchronous request as part of the request, and then what's actually going to happen is it's going to be immediately processed, immediately queued up. If I say, look, I don't want to process this one immediately, I want to put it in as a background job, then we can set up background jobs to send that information. So what this can actually do is we can support situations where you want really high volume or you don't want high volume. OData can handle this, and we can create a data entity. The error handling is not going to be as clear as this. It's going to be more overhead because we need to make live calls, right? Does the customer exist? Does the sales order exist? Does the vendor exist? Does the purchase order exist? So we would have to do a lookup, and if it's not, we would have to create it. We would have to figure out what legal entity it goes in, and we would have to process that. As part of our request, we can actually support processing information from different legal entities. As part of the request is I can actually specify which legal entity that customer is going to go to. And because this is an array, in one request, I could say, well, I want to take this record and I want to create a customer group in 4 legal entities, and I want to then create the customer maybe in 6 legal entities and have different legal entities. Again, that's going to be very, very easy to see, and that would be a challenge in OData and using other technologies. You would have to do find requests in different legal entities and see if it doesn't exist, and if it doesn't exist. So reviewing those error handling and those logs in DMF, I think, would be a challenge. So we've got a simple logging mechanism here, simple queuing. We can see what the request is. We can see what type it is. We can see if there's any errors, and we can handle, inserts and updates across legal entities.
Hey, Michael.
Yep.
Can you speak for a minute about, like what if we need to do some data transformation on the import, some ETL to the data being imported, either because it doesn't match the same field name or because data doesn't exist in the source system that needs to exist in D365?
Exactly. Yeah. So, external systems don't always, know or have the same concepts of F&O. They might not have a concept of financial tags or financial dimensions. They may not have those values. We may want to hard code some values. We may want to do some transformation. An external vendor customer group might not be the same as an F&O customer group. So they may have a field that we may want to do some formatting, do some conditions on it, and we can actually do that. So as part of this one here, we can actually support different mapping or different formatting options. So we can actually say, we don't have a value. In this case here, I have, if we look at the flow, I've hard-coded the customer group as 10. The customer group's a mandatory field. So as a currency, HubSpot doesn't have a concept of customer groups. It's not a concept it has. So what we can actually do is we can have when the customer account is created, we can actually use a setup, a template setup that we can build, where we can actually default that one. We can say, well, HubSpot doesn't have it, so I'm actually going to go away and I'm actually going to go and default that for you when you do some mapping. So we have various mappings that you can build, and we can actually say, if I'm doing a customer account, what is it that I want to do? I want to default some information, right? So we could say, hey, I don't have, where's the customer account going to come from? I'm not sure. I'm going to default that one. So for example, we can default some information, and we can actually default that across legal entities. So we can actually say, the language is a required field on the customer. HubSpot doesn't know what that language is. That's okay. We'll default it. And we can actually default it based on the legal entity where that customer account is going. So if I'm creating the customer account in this legal entity, it's going to go to ENUS. If I'm going to go into here, it's going to go to GB. If I don't catch it on any of these records, then I'm going to default one there. So we can actually do transformation and mapping, right? So if you were calling a DMF entity, you have to pass it valid information, and you have to pass it the required information. And if you don't pass it, the insert or the update will fail. So what we can actually do here is we can help understand what those unknowns are and help you work around those, right? And we can we do transformations, and we can do different transformations. If the value is A, we're going to convert it to B. If the value is B, convert it to C. If you don't have a value, we can default it to D. And we can do things like that.
And I think that's one of the really nice features with the template and the column mapping features in AMCS is that you can build a lookup table, totally on the fly with no need for any sort of development or customization. Yep. So if you have an external system that operates on a different chart of accounts or has different concepts of financial dimension values, you can build that mapping directly within D365 and maintain it there going forward and reuse it over and over again.
Exactly. So yeah, so the consideration again is simple error handling, simple logging, the ability to create and update records across legal entities in single requests, and either queue those up for immediately processing and get the result back, or asynchronous. And this is a simple request with a customer. We also support GL journals and different kind of trade agreements and GL journals and things like that. Imagine if you had a journal and you had 20,000 lines. Well, that's never going to work real time. So we can actually queue that. Again, we can queue that up, and we can place that into a queue, and we can have we could call it real time. I wouldn't, recommend that with a large journal, but maybe a small journal you do want to do it real time, and we can actually place that into the queue. We can decide whether we want to process that real time or not. Once that's done, we then have the business events that we support. So when that journal is picked up, you're going to get a business event. If we validate that journal, you'll get a business event. If we post that journal, you get a business event. And if that posting is successful or not, you'll get that information. And you can any time you can always query the results. The primary key or the identifier is a GUID. The system will assign that. If you want to assign it, so you want to track the requests, then you can actually pre-assign this GUID, and we'll stamp it in here. And then you can actually then query this through either an OData call or a web service call to find out what the status is.
Yeah, Michael, one of the premises for this is that we want to leverage AMCS as an iPaaS solution, which means we could have multiple different systems passing customer data or order data or journal data into D365 via this pathway. How can you use AMCS to differentiate the source of your integrated data?
Sure. So we've got many different templates. We've got, a couple of hundred of these. We've got the journals. We've got budget register, budget allocation, credit card journals. We've got composite imports. So in one import, I could say, I want you to load customers, customer groups. Once the customer groups have loaded, then load the customers. Once they've done, then load the bank accounts for the customers. Once they've done, loading any secondary contact information, secondary address and phone numbers. And we can then maybe even post a journal at the same time. And all of those is, we need to know where that request is coming from. And, if we do want to send a business event, who do we send it to? Now, one option, is on every single table that we support, we could add a bunch of fields to say, hey, where did this come from, right? And not only where did it come from, but any routing information, like, yes, it came from HubSpot, but what account in HubSpot? What was the unique identity? Was it Avantiico at HubSpot, or was it Michael at HubSpot? Where did that come from? Well, you could add a field to every single table that you support. That would be, 4 or 5 fields in, 200, 300 tables. That's not really scalable. So any request that comes in from the web service interface, we actually track metadata about that request. Where did it come from? And we stamp that. So when that record is processed, when we then send a business event back, so this request on here is actually going to create or update a customer. This doesn't know what the customer account is. It's able to find that customer account. But once the business event fires, and that this customer may be updated tonight, I can send the request now, and I can kick the batch off at 10 o'clock tonight. So the business event might not fire until 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. How does it know where to go? Well, any request that we come in, we're actually tracking the metadata about that request. So where did it come from? When the business event fires back, we actually include that metadata in the business event. So the business event will say, look, a customer was created, but it was created or updated through AMCS, through this framework. We can actually get that initial request metadata back and put it into the response payload. So the business event response payload, which is here, this actually has metadata in it about the original request. So it actually knows, we got a request, but where did that came from? We know where it came from, and we can actually get that information. So we actually know that business event came from HubSpot, and this was a unique information from HubSpot. This is actually the primary key field of the customer account in HubSpot. So even though this business event was fired asynchronously after the customer account was created, we know where that information was created, and we don't need to stamp this on every single field, every single table. It wouldn't be scalable to stamp, on several hundred tables in the system. Oh, it came from HubSpot. Oh, it came from CRM. Oh, it came from NetSuite. No, we track that in a separate, we track that metadata separately, so that the business event is fired. It said, yep, I've received some information, I've received a request, I've processed that request, everything's go. It's sending that back. Now I have that information. Now I can actually make some decisions. So in the business event, once I've picked that up, I said, okay, well, you were at HubSpot, you came from HubSpot. So I'm going to send that back to HubSpot. And then HubSpot's able to read that information. HubSpot supports different workflows and different webhooks. So HubSpot is able to pick that up, and HubSpot is able to see that information. So I'm sending that back to HubSpot. In that case, one there, it said, yeah, okay, got you. I'm going to, in this case, I've just said, look, just create an in-app notification, right? But where does it send that to? I've given it the information.
So just to contextualize that a bit, when you say we're capturing that information so you don't have to modify, all the different tables you're hitting, you're saying, for example, in this case, we don't need to add an external reference and external source fields to cust table because it exists in our data import. Same thing if we had customers and vendors and sales orders and purchase orders all as data being brought in via integration. We're capturing that metadata on the data import, which is tied to the eventual thing that gets created. So we it's all encapsulated within the data import, and it doesn't need to live in all the downstream tables.
Yeah, so we can have a simple request. It can be asynchronous, super lightweight, high volume. When we decide to process this information, it could be now, it could be later on at night. I mean, that could be tomorrow. It's able to scrape this information back, and we store this information. So when the business event fires, it will have that information. So if you were,
yeah, I was gonna say, so Michael, HubSpot is, a professional tool, it's an advanced tool. It has the ability to capture that information coming back from AMCS, from the business event. But what if the solution doesn't have that capability? How would you plug this into like an integration management agent or a Power App flow that fires off an email update to an inbox or something like that?
Yeah, so the way we've designed this is the two systems aren't talking, directly talking to each other. So we have Power Automate in the middle, and so the flexibility is this gives us a whole bunch of different options to as technology changes or as requirements changes, we can actually shield some of those decisions and make some of those decisions. So if F&O was down, I could retry. If F&O gave me a throttling error, I could retry. If the web service, if F&O was not accepting requests, then what we could do is say, not a problem, I can't call this, I'll place that request into a SFTP site and have F&O pick that up into an SFTP site. I could then say, well, I don't want to send a business event, I want to send an alert, I want to send a text message, I want to do something else. The benefit of those is Power Automate has all of those connections. In terms of F&O, you can build your own. We encourage this. We have some test libraries that we ship. You can build your own imports, and you can customize these. So if you add a custom field, it will show up. If you want to build your own import, you can actually build your own import. If you want to build one that combines things, if you want to say, well, in one import, I want to load up customer groups and vendor groups, we can support that. And we can then, that with the power of, say, Logic Apps and Power Automate, we can decide, where the information goes, any custom error handling, any custom alerts, any custom notifications, Do I want to route it to Power Automate? Do I want to send that request, directly to a webhook? Do I want to send it directly to HubSpot? You could, and you could actually build your own business event, destination framework. But in this case, we've just used Power Automate because I think the flexibility of this gives us the ability to make those decisions. So if you did want to call a no data call on the import, then you could actually do that one. You could actually build that one saying, well, I'm actually going to do a check. Maybe you want to do a VLOOKUP. Maybe you have an Excel spreadsheet where you want to do some mapping. You could actually build that in here. You could actually do a separate step on here to say, well, hang on a sec, I've got an external Excel file, or I want to, an external database where I want to do some mapping. I can do that one on there. And again, I can do things like error handling and retrying and things like that.
Yeah, I think one of the compelling arguments for using Power Automate as a data broker here is shielding yourself from complex changes. As things are rapidly changing in the D365 and Microsoft world. From a technology standpoint, you break your integration into two pieces, and if this, the first half stays the same and the second half needs to change, you don't have to recreate your integration from scratch. You only need to rebuild the bit with the new technology you want to adopt. So I think that's a pretty interesting and compelling argument.
Yeah, exactly. So from HubSpot's perspective, it's sending a webhook request to this URL. That's all it's doing. Internally, we could, as technology changes, we can do this. If I did want an OData call, I could put this in. I could put a condition in. If I decided I wanted to place this into a SharePoint site, I can place this into a SharePoint site. If I wanted to do different types of transformations and validations to get me the information, I can. And then, it provides all of the error handling, and it provides support for throttling and retrying, and it gives you all of the different dashboards, and then it has support for the automation center where you can see the overall health of the system. And again, we've actually, and it has built-in connectors, right? So it has a built-in connector to F&O, and then we're just using that and the post to actually just post that information to F&O, and it handles all of the information. And again, from a privacy, do you want to expose client IDs and client secrets to external systems? How do you manage those? How do you revoke those? How do you track those ones? Well, the answer is we're not, right? We are protecting all of that information in the Power Automate, and we can rotate those secrets. We can change them at any time, and Power Automate has built-in connectors. So this one here is the connector to our web service. The challenge is how do you call those web services? And that's something that we've got with the Postman collection. I don't think anyone else is doing that. But these are all our imports. We've got journals and customers. We've got sales orders. And for any of those, it actually gives you, here's the URL, here's a sample request, here's how you would call that one, here are the fields, there's an enum. Again, good luck, that could be a challenge, is to say, well, I need to do the account type. What is it? Now you've got a list of all of those. How many characters? Is it optional? Is it mandatory? We can do that one. We also help out with things like financial dimensions and financial tags, understanding how to do those. With the standard DMF, you're going to have to pass a string, and you're going to have to know what those segments are, what's in those segments, how many segments, and what are the values in that. Well, we handle that in a super simple way. We deserialize that for you, and if you just want to pass it a department, right? You don't need to build a string with dashes or underscores and know how F&O is set up. Just pass in the department. That's all you have to do, and then we'll handle the rest. We'll handle the validation. We'll handle the mapping. We will handle all of that. We'll handle all of that one for you as well. So we'll do that. Not a problem.
Cool. Michael, is there anything else you want to show? Otherwise, we'll give some room for Q&A at the end.
I think that's it.
All right, so let me take the screen share back. So Today, we walked through how to build an API-based integration with HubSpot using the AMCS ISV solution and using Power Automate as a data broker. We talked about the difference between OData and AMCS-based integrations. Some of the advantages to using AMCS over OData is the logging capabilities, update versus creation logic, and the number of calls that need to be made to handle that, the ability to handle cross-company requests, the ability to push data through message versus file handling, the ability to do data mapping. There's more, I think, that is going to come very rapidly, even this summer, where, imagine a scenario where you're bringing in data through an API and there are errors. There's an issue, this value doesn't exist. Well, imagine that you push that data to an agent with the dynamic 365 Finance MCP as a tool, and you give it the ability to say, with these types of errors, you can try to fix that error yourself. I think that we're going to come a long way from an integration stability and management standpoint, where with controlled scenarios, we'll be able to use that to improve our integration success rate significantly. So that'll be a really interesting thing to watch over the next few months. So yeah, with that, we'll conclude the session. We'll open it up to Q&A. If anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat or come off mute. Otherwise, I'm Dan, he's Michael, and thanks, Colin, for moderating today, and thanks for joining our session.
And not looking like we have any in the Q&A or the chat section. So if there are any lingering questions, please feel free to reach out, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thanks, everybody.